The council hall of Veyrath Station had not known silence like this in 3,000 years of recorded galactic history. 42 species sat in their designated chambers, their translators humming softly, their diplomatic feeds streaming data from 1,000 worlds. And then, at 0900 Standard Galactic Time, every single human frequency went dark. Ambassador Zyrelin Davash of the Sephiroid Collective pressed 4 of her 6 fingers against her cranial ridge and stared at the blank human terminal. Her assistant, a young Sephiroi named Thuvel, whispered something incomprehensible into her ear. She did not answer. She was watching the silence the way one watches a wildfire approaching from a great distance. Fascinated, terrified, unable to look away. At the center of the great rotunda, Grand Facilitator Omeros Vek of the Drelethi Sovereignty rose to address the assembly. Omeros was ancient even by Drelethi standards. He had presided over the accession of 17 new species into the council. He had mediated the Salvari-Quillane border conflict. He had personally signed the Compact of the 14 Moons. Nothing in his 4 centuries of diplomatic service had prepared him for this moment. Fellow representatives, Omeros said, his voice amplified and translated across every frequency in the chamber, it appears that the human delegation has ceased communication. A murmur moved through the hall like a tide. Ceased how? Demanded Veldris Tanaki, the sharp-tongued representative of the Karath Assembly. Veldris had never liked humans. She had said so publicly on multiple occasions. But even she looked unsettled now, her bioluminescent markings flickering in patterns that translated, roughly, as alarm. They cannot simply cease. They are a member species. They have obligations. Their frequency is not jammed, said Thuvel quietly, looking at his data panel. It is closed, deliberately. From their end. The room went very still. It had been, by any measure, a confusing 6 months. The humans had been growing increasingly withdrawn. Their ambassador, a woman named Dr. Seren Calloway, had stopped attending secondary sessions. Their trade liaisons had begun redirecting routine inquiries. Their science exchange students had, one by one, requested early return to Earth. At the time, the Council had attributed this to what their cultural analysts called a human cold period, cycles of introversion that occasionally affected the notoriously emotional species. But this was not introversion. This was severance. A second terminal flickered. Then a third. The massive holographic display at the center of the chamber, which normally showed a real-time web of diplomatic connections spanning 100,000 light-years, now showed a single dark node where humanity should have been. The node did not pulse. It did not rotate. It simply sat there, black and inert, like a dead star. Omeros Vek stood at his podium for a very long moment. In his 4 centuries, he had developed an instinct for when history was being made. He felt it now, heavy and electric in the recycled air of the station. Send a formal inquiry, he said at last. We have sent 14, Thuvel replied. Beginning 47 minutes ago. And? No response. The signal reaches the edge of the solar system's diplomatic relay. Then it stops. They have erected what our technicians are calling a hard boundary communication protocol. Nothing goes in. Nothing comes out. Ambassador Groven Sarkay of the Ulathai Communion, a massive being who communicated primarily through resonant chest vibrations, let out a low hum that shook the chamber floor. His translator box rendered it, "This is unprecedented. In the history of the Council, no species has voluntarily cut diplomatic contact. Not fully. Not like this. There was the Salvari incident. Someone offered from the back rows. The Salvari sent a letter of withdrawal," Groven Sarkay replied. "The humans have sent nothing. No letter. No statement. No formal declaration. They simply stopped." Dr. Seren Calloway's empty seat gleamed under the chamber lights. It was the most terrifying object in the known galaxy at that moment. Not because of what it contained, but because of what it did not. "What do the humans want?" asked a young Travani delegate near the back, newly appointed and still wide-eyed at the scale of galactic politics. No one answered her because no one knew. And that, Omeros Vek understood with a cold certainty he had not felt in centuries, was precisely the point. In the deep heart of the Milky Way galaxy, on a pale blue dot that had, until 47 minutes ago, been a cooperative and productive member of the galactic community, something had changed. And the rest of the galaxy was only now beginning to understand that they had no idea what it was, or what came next. The silence from Earth was not empty. It was full of something. And that something was watching. Senior analyst Preethis Owen of the Council Intelligence Bureau had not slept in 36 hours. She was a Mithrakai, a species that typically required only 4 hours of neural rest per cycle. But even for her, the data she was processing had become a kind of waking nightmare. She sat surrounded by 11 holographic panels, each showing a different strand of the same terrible thread. She had been tasked by Grand Facilitator Omeros Vec with a single question. Why? Not how the humans had cut communication. That was already understood in technical terms. But why? Why now? Why at all? Preethis was good at finding whys. It was the reason she had risen to senior analyst at the unusually young age of 82. But this why was different. This why had roots that went back decades, and the deeper she dug, the more she found buried there. Start from the beginning, she told herself and began reading. The humans had joined the Galactic Council 41 years ago, following first contact with a Drelethi survey vessel that had detected their early faster-than-light signature. The contact had been textbook, careful, respectful, staged over 3 years. Humanity had been frightened, then curious, then elated. They had sent their best scientists, their most eloquent statespeople. They had arrived at Veyrath Station with their eyes wide open and their hands extended. And the Council had welcomed them. Mostly. Preethis pulled the record of the first 6 months. Humanity's technology had been assessed as Category 3, roughly equivalent to where the Ulithi had been 7 centuries ago. The assessment had been conducted by a panel of Drelethi and Karath experts. The humans had submitted to the process without complaint. Then she found the first anomaly. Hidden in the bureaucratic language of the technology assessment report was a note: human propulsion advances reclassified from Category 3 to Category 2B pending further review. Further review that, she now noticed, had never come. The reclassification had simply stayed in the pending column indefinitely. For 41 years. She pulled the next thread. Human medical research. 15 years ago, a human scientist named Dr. Yael Obenhaus had developed what she called a cellular regeneration cascade, a technique that, in human trials, had shown the ability to reverse terminal neural degeneration. She had presented the research to the Council's Medical Exchange Board, requesting peer review and potential inclusion in the Galactic Medical Registry. The request had been referred to a subcommittee. The subcommittee had referred it to a working group. The working group had referred it back to the subcommittee. The process had repeated itself in various forms for 11 years. Dr. Obenhaus had died 8 years ago. Her research sat in archive unreviewed. Preethis set that file aside and opened another. Resource allocation. 6 years ago, a cluster of human colony ships had requested emergency passage rights through the Tethys corridor following a catastrophic failure in their life support manufacturing supply chain. The Karath Assembly, which controlled the corridor, had denied the request on the grounds that the corridor was classified as a restricted commercial lane. The denial had taken 14 months to process. The colony ships had taken an alternate route, adding 2 years to their journey. 3 of the 7 ships had experienced secondary failures during the detour. Combined casualties, 912 humans. She leaned back and stared at her panels. None of these incidents, taken alone, was catastrophic. They were bureaucratic failures, the kind that happened in any sufficiently complex organization. Delays, referrals, classifications. The machinery of 100-species government grinding slowly and unevenly. But taken together, laid out in sequence, they formed a pattern that made the fur on the back of her neck stand up. The pattern was not malice. It was something more subtle and, in some ways, worse: indifference. 41 years of humanity offering things, discoveries, insights, resources, lives, and the Council accepting what was useful and quietly burying what was inconvenient. 41 years of humanity asking for things, recognition, access, review, protection, and the Council processing the requests at its own pace, on its own schedule, with its own priorities. They were patient, Preethis whispered to herself. They were extraordinarily patient. She found the final thread almost by accident. A diplomatic communiqué, dated 9 months ago, from Dr. Seren Calloway to the office of Grand Facilitator Omeros Vec. It was a formal request for a private session to discuss, in Calloway's words, a matter of significant concern to the human delegation regarding the long-term structure of Council engagement. The request had been logged. It had been assigned a reference number. It had been placed in the queue for scheduling consideration. And it had never been scheduled. Preethis stared at the communiqué for a long time. Then she saved her entire report, compressed it into a priority transmission, and sent it directly to the Grand Facilitator's personal channel with a single line of annotation. They told us. We did not listen. She closed her panels and sat in the dark of the record's wing, and she thought about 912 names she had never known. Director General Amara Solis had a habit of drumming her fingers when she was calm. It was a tick her staff had learned to read correctly, despite how counterintuitive it seemed. The drumming meant she was in control. The stillness was the thing to fear. Her fingers drummed steadily on the obsidian surface of the conference table. Around her sat the 12 individuals who had, collectively, made the most consequential decision in human history. They were not politicians in the traditional sense. 3 were scientists, 2 were historians. 1 was an economist. 1 was an AI ethicist named Deo Ferreira who had barely spoken during the 22 months of deliberation but whose 3-page summary document had, in the end, provided the framework that everyone else had organized their thinking around. The remaining 5 held various roles in the sprawling apparatus of Earth's unified government, which had been formed 60 years ago, just in time to exist when the Drelethi arrived. The room was 3 kilometers beneath the lunar surface, behind 17 layers of signal shielding. No communication left this room unless Amara Solis authorized it. "Status report," she said. Commander Teju Rawlings, the room's logistics specialist, spoke first. The communication cutoff is holding. All 47 diplomatic relay nodes have accepted the shutdown protocol. The Council has sent inquiry signals at regular intervals. All have been received, logged, and held in buffer. No responses have been sent. "Response protocols?" Amara asked. "Ready at your instruction. We have prepared 11 different response packages, ranging from formal withdrawal statement to silent continuation. None have been deployed." Amara nodded. Her fingers drummed. "Dr. Ferreira," she said. "You predicted they would panic within 24 hours. Current estimate?" Deo Ferreira, a compact man with the particular stillness of someone who had spent most of his career thinking about machine cognition, looked up from his personal display. "I was wrong about the timeline. They are not panicking. They are analyzing. That is more dangerous for them, actually. The longer they analyze without data, the more they will find." "Find what?" "Themselves," Deo said simply. A pause moved through the room. This had been, at its core, the strategy. Not withdrawal. Not punishment. Not war. Something that humans had always been, throughout their history, uniquely capable of: the strategic use of absence. Every species in the galaxy communicated through presence. Through embassies, delegates, transmissions, protocols. Presence was the default language of interstellar diplomacy. And humanity had spent 41 years learning that defaulting to that language meant being processed, categorized, delayed, and quietly deprioritized. So they had chosen, instead, to become a question. "Walk me through the economic projections again," said Finance Coordinator Yuki Tanimura, a sharp-eyed woman who had been skeptical of the plan from the beginning, not because she thought it was wrong, but because she was constitutionally unable to trust anything she had not modeled at least 40 times. Dr. Hiroshi Mwangi, the economist, pulled up his display. "In the short term, we lose access to the Tethys corridor for non-emergency transit. We lose the Council's arbitration channel for the 3 pending trade disputes. We lose priority access to the Galactic Medical Registry, though as the archive shows, that access has been functionally non-existent for a decade." "Losses?" Yuki pressed. "Manageable. We have spent the past 6 years quietly building redundancy into every system that relied on Council infrastructure. Our supply chains have alternate routes. Our colony ships have upgraded life support manufacturing. That will not happen again. Our science exchange programs have been redirected to bilateral agreements with 4 non-Council species who were more than happy to engage directly." "And the gains?" Hiroshi smiled just slightly. "The question is not what we gain when we cut contact. The question is what we gain when we restore it. And that is entirely up to us." This was the calculation that the Council had not expected, because no one in the history of the Galactic Council had ever made it. Every species, upon joining, had behaved as though membership were an end in itself. A destination. They had accepted the Council's pace, its procedures, its hierarchies because the alternative, outside, had seemed unthinkable. Humanity had spent 3 years quietly determining that the outside was not unthinkable at all. "They will send a ship," said Commander Rawlings. "Not a signal. A physical ship. Within 72 hours. "Yes," Amara agreed. "Let them come." Her fingers drummed. "Give them the outer marker only. No docking authorization. No communication until they identify the specific agenda of their visit. And if they claim emergency? Then we will evaluate the emergency." She looked around the room. "We are not cruel. We are not at war. We are simply unavailable until further notice. That is a position the council will have to learn to take seriously. She paused, then added one more instruction. Have Dr. Calloway's original communique ready. The one that was never scheduled. We will be presenting it to them eventually. With the date stamp. The room was very quiet. Somewhere above them, 3 kilometers of rock separated this chamber from the lunar surface, and beyond that, the cold silence of space. And in that silence, 47 diplomatic relay nodes held their buffer of unanswered council inquiries, growing larger by the hour. Humanity was unavailable. And for the first time in 41 years that felt exactly right. Captain Cyrindel Vex had commanded the Galactic Survey Vessel Convergence of Accord for 12 years. She had navigated asteroid fields, mediated 2 mid-transit disputes between rival trading consortiums, and once talked a malfunctioning orbital defense grid out of targeting her ship by personally speaking to its maintenance AI for 6 unbroken hours. She was not a person who frightened easily. She was frightened now. Not of the humans. She wanted to be clear about that, at least in her own mind. She had worked alongside humans for a decade. Traded with them, eaten with them, argued with them in committee rooms at Veyrath Station until the lights dimmed automatically because the session had run past scheduled hours. Humans were loud, occasionally irrational, and had a baffling tendency to tell jokes during tense negotiations, but they were not threatening. They were not violent. They were not the kind of species that did anything like this. That was why she was frightened. Because if humans, patient, cooperative, procedure-following humans, had done this, then something had gone genuinely wrong. And whatever had gone wrong was large enough that 41 years of institutional momentum had not been sufficient to absorb it. Distance to the heliopause? She asked her navigator. 6 hours at current speed, said Ensign Favallo, a young Travani who had been wide-eyed since they left Veyrath Station and showed no signs of narrowing his eyes anytime soon. The human relay node is active at the boundary. It is receiving our identification signal but not responding. Send it again. Yes, Captain. She stood at the forward observation port and looked at the star field. Sol was visible now, a bright point slightly warmer in color than the surrounding stars, unremarkable in every astronomical sense. The third planet was not visible at this distance. But she knew it was there, 3 kilometers of irony wrapped in atmosphere and cloud. Her communications officer, a seasoned Drelethi named Oru, turned from her station. Captain, I have been analyzing the human signal pattern. There is something interesting. She paused, as if uncertain whether interesting was the right word. The relay node is not simply blocking our signals. It is sorting them. Sorting how? By content type. Our standard diplomatic inquiry signals are being held in buffer. But I ran a test and sent a civilian navigation beacon, the kind used by independent traders. That signal passed through. Cyrindel turned from the window. So the blockade is targeted. Specifically targeted at council diplomatic channels. Private signals, commercial signals, scientific data transmissions. Preliminary analysis suggests all of those may be passing through. Only official council diplomatic communication is being held. Cyrindel absorbed this for a moment. They are not isolating themselves from the galaxy. They are isolating themselves from us. From the council, specifically. Yes. She returned to her command chair and sat very carefully, with the deliberate movements of someone trying to think clearly. That changes the framing significantly. We were operating on the assumption of a full communications withdrawal. Total isolation. But this is not that. This is selective withdrawal. Surgical. They have had 41 years to learn exactly how our systems work, Oru said. Including which channels carry which signal types. Indeed. Cyrindel tapped her armrest. Can you reach anyone inside the human diplomatic relay infrastructure? Not through official channels. Personal channels. Anyone you know? Oru hesitated. I have a contact. A human scientist I collaborated with during the Veyrath data sharing initiative 4 years ago. Dr. Pemba Kolari. We have exchanged personal correspondence occasionally. Send him a message. Personal channel, no council routing tags. Completely unofficial. Tell him his friend says hello and ask if there is anything he wants to discuss. Oru looked uncertain. That is rather informal for a first contact attempt in a diplomatic crisis. Yes, Cyrindel agreed. Which is why it might actually work. 40 minutes later, as the convergence of Accord crossed into the outer solar system and the single human relay node acknowledged their presence with a cold yellow marker light, present but not welcoming, Oru's personal channel chimed. The message from Dr. Pemba Kolari was 11 words long. Hello, Oru. We are well. We will talk when it is time. Surindel read it 3 times. Then she had it transmitted back to Varath Station, to Grand Facilitator Omeros Vec, with a single note of her own appended, "They are not gone. They are waiting. I do not think they will tell us what they are waiting for. I think we are meant to figure that out ourselves." She set the ship to low-power drift at the outer marker 5 million kilometers from the relay node, and settled in to wait. Outside, Sol burned quietly. The third planet turned. And inside the ship, 40 crew members of 8 different species sat in the unprecedented experience of being held at arm's length by a species they had all, in various ways, taken for granted. It was an educational experience. Surindel suspected that was precisely the point. The emergency session had been called within 6 hours of Surindel Vec's report arriving from the solar system's edge. It was the fastest council convening in living memory, and the chamber that filled with representatives that morning had a quality that Omeros Vec had not seen in 4 centuries of service. Everyone was quiet before the session was called to order. That never happened. Usually the pre-session chamber was a cacophony of sidebar conversations, translator chatter, the ritual exchanging of diplomatic formalities that species had developed over millennia of interstellar contact. Today there was only a low, uneasy murmur, and even that died away quickly. 41 species in their seats, one dark and empty. Omeros Vec called the session to order and immediately recognized Prithis Own, who had requested the first speaking position. The senior analyst from the Intelligence Bureau was not a natural public speaker. She was methodical, precise, and tended to present information in the order she had found it rather than the order that made for compelling listening. But what she had found was compelling enough that none of that mattered. She spoke for 40 minutes. She presented her findings without editorial comment, laying out the timeline of grievances with the dispassionate clarity of someone who had spent a career reading archives. The technology reclassification. The medical research lost in subcommittee for 11 years. The 912 casualties on colony ships denied corridor access. Dr. Calloway's unscheduled meeting request, sitting in a queue for 9 months with no response. She did not say that the council had done these things intentionally. She did not use the word negligence. She simply presented the record item by item, date by date, and let the record speak. When she finished, the chamber was very quiet. Ambassador Veldris Tanaki of the Karath Assembly was the first to speak. This was notable primarily because Veldris had, historically, been the most consistently dismissive voice on human affairs in the council. She said only 4 words: the corridor denial. Explain. The Karath administrative liaison, unprepared to be called out directly, began to describe the commercial classification process that had led to the denial. He was thorough. He was precise. He explained the regulatory framework clearly. And with each sentence, Omeros Vec watched the expression on Veldris Tanaki's face go through a series of changes that he found quietly devastating. The denial had followed proper procedure. That was the problem. Every step had been correct. Every form had been filed. Every classification had been applied according to the guidelines. 912 humans had died on a detour caused by a regulatory decision made by a subcommittee of 7 beings who had each, individually, done nothing wrong. The system had worked exactly as designed. And the design had a blind spot the size of a planet. Grovan Sarkay of the Ulathai Communion raised a resonant inquiry. The question before us is not whether procedural failures occurred. The record indicates they did. The question is, what do the humans want? We cannot address what we do not know. We know one thing they want, said Prithis Own, still at the speaker's podium. They wanted a meeting 9 months ago. The request is in the archive. We did not provide it. I would suggest providing it now, with the caveat that the meeting will occur on their terms, not ours. On their terms? Veldris repeated. You are proposing we negotiate entry into a negotiation. I am proposing we treat them as equal parties, Prithis said very carefully. Which is what they were promised when they joined. The silence that followed had texture. Omeros Vec had been in diplomacy long enough to recognize the specific quality of silence that meant a room full of intelligent beings was collectively confronting something they should have seen a long time ago. He had a gift he had been holding since Surindel Vec's report arrived. The 11-word message from Dr. Pemba Kolari. We are well. We will talk when it is time. He had been turning those 11 words over in his mind for 6 hours. They were not hostile. They were not punitive. They were patient, that particular human patience that Prithis had mentioned in her report. The patience that came from a species that had been waiting for 41 years and had finally, with great deliberation, decided to stop. He rose from his facilitator's chair and addressed the chamber. 41 years ago, he said, Humanity arrived at this station with extraordinary goodwill. They brought their science, their culture, their energy. They were enthusiastic partners. They were generous with what they had. He paused. We accepted what was useful and we did not, I think, take sufficient care with the rest. The chamber was very still. I am formally proposing that this council issue a direct and personal communication to Director General Amara Solis of the Human Unified Government. Not a diplomatic form. Not a protocol inquiry. A letter. From me to her, in plain language, acknowledging that Dr. Calloway's meeting request was never honored, and asking, with no conditions attached, when and how the council might be permitted to address that oversight. A representative from the Quillane sovereignty raised a procedural objection about the informality of the approach. Veldris Tanaki, to the surprise of every species in the chamber, told him to sit down. He sat down. Umaros Vec wrote the letter himself, by hand, in a tradition his species had not observed in 3 centuries. He sent it through Surindel Vec's ship, via Oru's personal channel to Dr. Pemba Kolari, because the official diplomatic channels were still not available to him. The letter was 6 paragraphs. The 6th was simply, "We would like to listen. We are ready now if you are willing." He sent it and waited, as the convergence of a cord drifted 5 million kilometers from an unanswered relay node, and the whole of the Galactic Council held its breath. The letter from Umaros Vec arrived at Dr. Pemba Kolari's personal terminal on a Tuesday morning, Geneva time, while Pemba was eating breakfast and pretending not to be anxious about the situation he had inadvertently become central to. His 11 words had, apparently, set something in motion. He forwarded the letter to Director General Solis's office within 60 seconds of reading it, with the annotation, "I think this is different." Amara Solis read the letter in her office on the 32nd floor of the Geneva Assembly Building, standing at her window looking at the lake. It was raining, the particular steady rain of early spring that had no urgency to it. She read the letter twice. Then she called her 12 advisors and said only, "Today." They gathered within 2 hours. Deo Ferreira had already read the letter. It had been shared across the Strategic Operations Network the moment it cleared Pemba's forward, and had prepared a 1-page analysis. His conclusion was characteristically brief. "This is authentic." He wrote it himself. No diplomatic language. No procedural framing. The admission in paragraph 3 is voluntary and unambiguous. "I recommend we respond." Amara had already decided to respond. The question was what to say. The 12 advisors spent 4 hours in the assembly chamber debating the terms. Not arguing, the arguments had all been had during the 22 months of planning. This was something different. The careful work of people who had used silence as a lever and now had to decide what they wanted to lift with it. Historian Lina Vasquez, who had said very little during the planning phase but had been quietly writing the history of this moment throughout, offered what turned out to be the framing that everything else organized around. The goal was never to punish them. The goal was to be taken seriously. If we return demanding punishment, we will get a settlement that lasts 10 years. If we return demanding structural reform, we might get something that lasts a century. "Define structural reform," said Yuki Tanimura. Lina pulled up a document she had been preparing for 8 months. It was 43 pages long. It addressed, in specific and detailed terms, the procedural gaps that had produced the corridor denial, the buried medical research, the stalled technology reclassification. It proposed a Human Affairs Review Board with binding authority, not advisory authority, binding, over decisions affecting human interests. It proposed mandatory timelines for scientific exchange reviews. It proposed a formal apology, entered into the Council record, for the 912. It did not propose withdrawal from the Council. It did not propose sanctions against any member species. It did not demand personal consequences for any individual. It was, in its entirety, a document about process. About the machinery of inclusion and how to make it actually work. "That's the document," Amara said, after reading it quietly for 20 minutes. "That's what we bring." Commander Rawlings reviewed the logistics of a return. 6 weeks to re-establish the diplomatic relay network. A formal summit at Veyrath Station on a schedule set by Earth. Dr. Calloway's original 9-month-old meeting request honored as the official first agenda item. Procedural symmetry that Deo Ferreira noted would be either deeply satisfying or aggressively pointed, depending on one's perspective and possibly both. Amara drafted the response to Umaros Vec herself. It was 3 paragraphs. The first acknowledged receipt of his letter. The second said that humanity was willing to engage in direct discussion. The third outlined, in plain language, that discussion would require addressing specific matters of record, and that a full list would be forthcoming through official channels within 30 days. She paused before sending it. Around her, the 12 advisors were quiet, watching. Outside, Geneva's reign continued, unhurried. "One more thing," she said. She added a fourth paragraph, which she had not planned to write until she was writing it. It said, "We do not wish to be outside the council. We joined because we believed in what it represented. We still believe in that. What we need is for the council to believe in it too, consistently for all its members. We look forward to that conversation." She sent it through Pemba Kolari's personal channel, as Omeros had sent his, because the official channels were still closed. The response reached Surindel Vek's ship at the outer solar marker at 1,400 hours, and Surindel read it with an expression her crew had never seen on her face before. Ensign Favalo asked, with characteristic directness, what the expression meant. "It means," Surindel said carefully, "that they are coming back. On their terms. Which means we have a great deal of work to do before they arrive." She transmitted the response to Veyrath Station and began calculating the return route. 41 species were about to receive a 43-page document outlining the structural reforms required for humanity's return to the Galactic Council. Surindel had read the document summary in 40 seconds, and she had only one thought: they are not wrong about any of it. The relay node at the edge of the solar system shifted from yellow to a warm amber color. Not open. Not yet. But no longer simply holding. Something was changing. 6 weeks, 3 days, and approximately 11 hours after Amara Solis sent her 4-paragraph response through a scientist's personal channel, the human delegation walked back into the Grand Assembly Hall of Veyrath Station. They did so quietly, without ceremony, in the middle of the morning session, because they had specifically requested not to be given a formal entrance. Dr. Seren Calloway, who led the delegation of 7, had said in the pre-arrival logistics call that she found formal entrances uncomfortable, and that she would prefer to simply arrive and get to work. The council had agreed. This, in itself, was noted in the historical record as the first instance of the council agreeing to a scheduling preference submitted by the human delegation within 24 hours of its submission. Historian Lena Vasquez, who had traveled with the delegation, added a footnote that read simply, "Progress." The hall did not go silent when the humans entered. That would have been too dramatic, too pointed. Instead, the murmur of session business paused for a moment, 41 species registering the presence of the 42nd, and then continued because Calloway had also requested that sessions not be disrupted on her account. The human delegation found their seats, which had been returned to their proper configuration 3 days before the arrival. The 7 humans sat down, arranged their materials, and Calloway looked up at Grand Facilitator Omeros Vek with an expression he had spent 6 weeks trying to prepare for. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had done something very hard and was not yet sure whether it had worked. But she also looked, Omeros thought, like someone who had walked into a room where the furniture was finally in the right place. He called the session to order and recognized the human delegation as the first speakers of the day. This was according to the agreed agenda, the fulfillment of the 9-month-old meeting request. Item 1, honored on schedule 22 months and 3 days after it should have been. Calloway spoke for 11 minutes. She did not use the 43-page document as a prop or a threat. She spoke from it as a framework, outlining in clear language what the human delegation had observed, what they had found in the archive, what they needed the council to consider. Her voice was steady. She paused occasionally, not for effect, but because she was choosing her words carefully and she wanted the translations to catch up. When she spoke about the 912 colony ship casualties, the chamber was as quiet as it had been in that first moment 6 weeks ago when the human diplomatic frequency went dark. Quieter, perhaps, because this silence had comprehension in it. She finished by referencing her own meeting request, the one that had sat for 9 months in the scheduling queue. "I do not raise this as an accusation," she said. "I raise it as an example. This room is full of intelligent and well-intentioned beings who represent species that genuinely believe in cooperation. The meeting request did not fail to be scheduled because anyone here wanted it to fail. It failed because the system did not prioritize it. What we are asking for, in every section of the document my colleagues have circulated, is a system that prioritizes more equitably." She paused. "We are not asking to be special. We are asking to be equal. That is, I believe, what the council was founded to provide." The response, when it came, took all day. Veldris Tanaki of the Karath Assembly spoke for 40 minutes, a speech that her own chief of staff described afterward as the most uncomfortable she had ever seen Veldris deliver, which was to say it was a genuine apology, rendered in the clipped and formal language of Karath diplomacy, but real underneath. She addressed the corridor denial directly and personally. She used the number 912. She did not offer a procedural explanation. Groven Sarkay of the Ulathai Communion proposed the establishment of the Human Affairs Review Board with binding authority, as outlined in the reform document, and moved that the vote be taken that same day. The vote passed with 39 in favor, 2 abstentions and 0 opposed. The Sepharoi Collective's ambassador Zyrelin Davash moved to formally enter into the Council record a statement of institutional acknowledgement, not quite an apology from the Council as a body, because the Council's procedures made such things complicated, but a statement acknowledging that the record showed systemic failures in the treatment of the human member species over a period of decades, and that the Council committed itself to the reforms proposed. The motion passed. It was entered into the record. The date stamp would show that it occurred on the same calendar day as the human delegation's return. After the session ended, Ulmaros Vec found Dr. Calloway in the corridor outside the chamber, standing at one of the observation windows that looked out into the star field. He came to stand beside her, and they looked at the same view in silence for a moment. "Thank you for coming back," he said. "We always intended to come back," she said. "We just needed the conversation to be possible first." He considered that. "You were patient through all of it." 41 years. Calloway smiled briefly. "We are a young species, grand facilitator. But patience is not actually a virtue of the young. Patience is what you develop when you understand that the alternative is despair, and you have decided not to despair." She looked back at the stars. "We were never going to despair. We were just going to be unavailable for a while." Umaros Vec returned to his office and stood at his own window. Below the station, through the observation port, the galaxy turned on its ancient axis. Somewhere in that vast and complicated dark, a pale blue planet was once again connected to the network of lights that made up the Galactic Council. Not because humanity had been powerless without it, but because humanity had chosen to return, on terms they had written themselves, after a silence that had changed everything. He thought about what 41 years of patience looked like when it finally spoke. He thought about the 11 words that had started it: "We are well. We will talk when it is time." He thought, "We should have listened much sooner." He thought, "We are listening now." And in the Grand Assembly Hall, still glowing with the business of the day, the human terminal pulsed with a steady, warm light. Present. Connected. No longer waiting. The lesson had been delivered without a single shot fired, without a single treaty broken, without a single act of aggression. Humanity had simply become quiet, and in that quiet had said everything that 41 years of talking had never managed to convey. The galaxy in the end had learned to hear it. Educational note. This story explores diplomacy, systemic institutional failure, the importance of inclusion and equity in governance, and the power of strategic nonviolent communication. The history of human civil rights movements, labor negotiations, and diplomatic history offers many real-world parallels to the themes explored here.